The mobile police get a little bit of backup. Here's your look at the new ThreeZero. This is the Patlabor, the mobile police, Ingram Unit number 2 and Ingram Unit number 3 compatible sets. The Ingram Unit 2 and Unit 3 compatible set collectible figure includes many of the interactive features to increase playability. It comes with a head of both Unit 2 and Unit 3, shoulder parts for both Unit 2 and Unit 3, and a number plate for again both Unit 2 and Unit 3. The compatibility of combined accessories with the single articulated body included in the set make the figure fully interchangeable between Ingram Unit 2 and Ingram Unit 3. Before we get a closer look at the Patlabor Ingram Unit 2 and Ingram Unit 3 as they share the exact same body, first thing we're going to do is figure out how tall the figure stands. While I am doing that, I'd like to send a thank you to the folks over at ThreeZero who made this review possible. If you're in the market to pick up the Ingram Unit 2 for yourself, it actually is currently pre-ordered on many websites with a release date of the third quarter 2020, so it's going to be coming soon. You're looking at the figure, though, nonetheless, standing 9.7 inches in height. And that, in centimeters, works out to be a figure that's 24.7 centimeters tall. This now marks the second Ingram unit we've had a look at. We'll bring in the other one right now. This is Ingram Unit 1, so you guys can see side to side how the figures stack up to one another. It would be logical to guess that being that they are part of the same mobile police, that the Ingram units are identical in design. For the most part, yes. While they share the exact same bodies and their framework is roughly about the same, things like shoulder pads, things like heads, for example, will be things that will be different between the two units. And while they, yes, share pretty much the same elements to one another, there's enough things changed from this unit to this unit here that it's definitely worth picking this one up, especially for the fact that it does have some compatible parts that we'll have a look at in a second. Before doing that, though, the first thing we're going to have a look at is the display stand that comes included with the Ingram Unit 2. It is, in fact, the exact same shared display stand that came included with the Ingram Unit 1. It does have the same adjustability to it. Before we do that, I just want to show you the coloring of the plastic. It's pretty much just a dark gray plastic. They've incorporated no additional coloring to it, which is perfectly fine. It's a nice looking base that I enjoyed the first time we had a look at the Ingram units, and I think it looks just as good in the Ingram Unit 2 release. It does have some adjustability to it. This section right here, if you just release the lock, allows the neck to slide up and down via this track. You'll see that there are all these little slots, grooves on the sides. When you are content and happy to display it in a certain angle, you simply just bring that down and it locks it in place, guaranteeing that, of course, if you're going to be putting the Ingram unit in a flight pose, the last thing you certainly would want to have is this to be falling forward, and that lock sort of guarantees that that's not going to be the case. In addition to that, the top neck does have an adjustable ratchet to it that does lock it into place. If you pinch this section down here, push this down, it does release the stress of that ratchet joint, allowing you to lock it into place just by letting it go. And it pretty much stays and keeps it in place. You can still pull it up, but pushing it down, you can't really quite pull that off until, again, you push this part, just push it down like that, and it allows you to slide it back and forth. In addition to that, this top section right here unpegs because it really doesn't have the means on its own to shift and rotate on its own. So basically what you need to do is you need to pull it off, find the position that you want to put it in, and then simply just lock it in place like so. Like with the Ingram Unit 1, if you just flip the figure around to the back, you pretty much have to pull the back plating off, and it leaves an open socket section that simply just attaches to the back of the peg. Latching that in place, you've now got yourself not the most, granted, exciting pose to put the Ingram unit into, but at least it shows that you can have it in a slightly levitating or leaping pose if you want to have it displayed like that. It still has the same problem that I found with the Ingram Unit 1 display base. If you unpeg it, it basically sits. I know this sounds like I've pretty much said the same thing before, because I have. There's this little lip of plastic right at the bottom jaw of a mouth, for example. That tabs into this open area right here, and it does guarantee you a nice secure fit. The only problem is, again, when you're pulling this off, because that lip is so small of plastic, I worry that it's going to develop stress marks. This is something I did stress, and quite literally, in the review of the Ingram Unit 1. The same thing I still feel holds true for the Ingram Unit 2. While I haven't had any problems whatsoever thus far, I feel long-term the idea of popping that off, putting it back in, popping it back off while you see, rinse and repeat, maybe long-term that's going to start developing stress marks. It hasn't happened thus far, but it's not to say that it may not happen down the road, so it's something you certainly want to be careful of. Now let's tackle the accessories that come included with the Ingram unit. For this, I have sort of split them off and categorized them. On this side over here are the component pieces required to migrate this unit over to the Ingram Unit 3 design. That includes the head, that includes the shoulder pads, and that also includes the license plate front and back. And then on this side is pretty much all the generalized accessories that are shared between both units, and so happen to also be the exact same accessories that also came included with the Ingram Unit 1. The first accessories we'll address is the 2 pilots that ThreeZero include with the figure. They give you 2, as certainly depending on your preference for displaying the Ingram unit either 2 or 3 model, you get 2 pilots, or at least 1 for each one. Included in this release is Aizoa Otao and Shinobu Nagumo. You can see that they are sharing quite similar outfits. Let me just make sure, of course, there we go. You can see a nice close-up look at the details done to these small little pilots. And while they, yes, share the exact same costumes, the frames are very drastically different from one another. The detailing is quite impressive, again, for how small these actually are. Right down to the patches on their sleeves, right down to the patches or branding on the side of their helmets. They're impressive little tiny figures. So small, in fact, I actually didn't even think I could catch the details on them. But right down to their faces, the smallest minute details, ThreeZero have incorporated into these pieces. They're quite incredible little things. They have no articulation at all, mind you, but we'll bring in also the other pilot that we had to look at. This is Noah Izumi. This was the pilot actually came included with the Ingram Unit 1. Of course, yes, they share all the same seating position because they're going to be sitting inside the cockpit of the open canopy that you can open on the actual Ingram unit. Like with the Ingram Unit 1, all you have to do is take this front bridged section here in shiny black plastic, pull this out, and you'll see it pulls out on a silver track. From there, you just bring this up, you lower the bottom section right here, and you've got yourself the revealed cockpit. I've always also found it helps if you just take the head of the Ingram unit and just tilt it up slightly. And then from there, just take whatever pilot you decide to go with and just slide it up, just like so. If you find it's helpful at all, you can also take yourself a very tiny screwdriver. But I found very much easier time, it seemed to slip these pilots inside the cockpit than I had the problem with Noah Izumi, for some strange reason, even though it's technically the exact same cockpit. As you can see, it fits perfectly fine in place, and then just to close up shop, you're going to bring up the bottom section here first, bring this around, and then just slide this into place. Sometimes if you don't have the figure, let me just bring this out again, if you don't have the figure completely up, and for this maybe we might take use of a screwdriver, just kind of navigate, there we go, bring the legs in, bring that up, bring that in, and push that in. And then you've got yourself the pilot sitting inside. A small, very tiny pilot that you can barely make out. But the detailing, the fact that they actually had an opening cockpit is really, really cool. And liked it so much on the Ingram Unit 1. It's nice to see, obviously, it would have carried over to the Ingram Unit 2 as well. Next, we'll have a look at the weapons that come included with the figure. We'll first address the Revolver. The Revolver is done in a nice gunmetal silver, with the handle done in a more chestnut brown. If it does look somewhat familiar, it's because it's identical. This is the one that came included with the Ingram Unit 1. It would make sense, of course, standard issued weapons to all the security officers. The Ingram units would be no different, so they are the exact same weapons. There's nothing different between these at all. And like with the Ingram Unit 1, I know it's going to sound like we're probably covering off a lot of the same similar territory. What you can do is bring the arm up, take and address the side leg of its, the leg thigh section here, and this piece here swings out, similar to the Ingram Unit 1. Take the Revolver and slide this down into place. And it's always a case where getting it into that little peg, there we go, you have to kind of just fit it a little bit further down, not at the opening of the barrel, but just from there you can close up shop. And as you can see, it does swing down that revolver until, of course, the mobile unit requires it. I did find on this particular unit, this was a little bit more easier to swing than the Ingram Unit 1, which I always found that the mechanism on mine was a little tighter. Here it's a little bit looser and quite easily brings out, draws out, again, for when the Ingram unit actually needs it. Another thing that's shared between the units is this one arm right here has a draw out secondary or inner section of the arm that pulls out. Whereas the Ingram Unit 1 was a little looser, now the opposite here, the Ingram Unit 2, I found was a little tighter to draw that arm out. This does allow for a little extra clearance, so when the arm wants to reach down and pull out its firearm, it does have that extra piece that hinges or slides out. Some nice detailing done to it. It's still using that gunmetal gray with a little bit of red done for the wiring. It doesn't work actually on this side. This side here is simply just a ball peg. It's only this side here. Same as with this leg, this part here, this section here doesn't open. It's only located on this side right here. Other familiar accessories that come included with the Ingram unit is, of course, the shield. Bringing in the Ingram Unit 1 shield, it is identical to one another. Nothing different between the two. They do work the exact same way. There's pegs located on the back, and what you need to do is you need to take the figure and you need to bring these out. Now, this is still an issue that I found the figure, really, if they could have done away with pulling these out, because essentially what you need to do is you need to pull those out on both sides, and then these pegs fit into place. I know I've already covered the territory when we had a look at the Ingram Unit 1. Nothing has changed, and unfortunately my frustrations are still in place when it comes to these being removable. If this had only been simply just magnetized, you could have attached the shield, could have attached it a couple of different ways actually, and you wouldn't have run the risk of this being lost, these smaller pegs being lost. It's fine and good if you want to, of course, display it always with the shield on its forearm, but for the off times that you don't want to display it with the shield, if you lose these on either side, you're going to have these big open holes where basically these peg covers should be there instead. It also comes included with two versions of the stun stick, both extended and retracted, similar to the one that we looked at before. And similar to that, you can take the retracted version of the stun stick, and that slides just underneath, inside this little bracket opening here on the back of the shield. A nice way to conceal the stun stick until, of course, it's required. It only allows you to really to hold the retracted version of the stun stick. Obviously, the extended version isn't going to fit. It will slide in there, yes, but with this sticking out, first of all, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And then again, you're going to have the risk that if you are bending the arm, if you're not careful, it's going to clip against the top of the stick, and it's going to most definitely break that right off. The last of its accessories, certainly at least from the weapons department, it does come included with the riot gun. The riot gun, again, reaching off to the side. I know we're doing a lot of comparisons side to side. It is the same one that we got with the Ingram Unit 1. It does look like, though, the coloring is slightly different. I mean, maybe it's just my eyes playing tricks on me, but it seems like the Ingram Unit 2 version of the riot gun is slightly darker, this one being up here. It's almost got like a little bit more of a purplish tint. Again, it could be simply my eyes just playing tricks on me. It works the exact same way. This back stock swings out. If you're not careful, this does detach quite easily, but it just plugs in, it pegs in on either side. This, of course, does have a working feature on the front. Overall, it's just, again, it's a nice looking accessory. Even again, if we've already gotten it before, obviously with each one of the Ingram units, it would make sense that they would have, again, the same standard issued accessories from one unit to the other. Lastly, for its general accessories, before we start tackling the Ingram Unit 3's components, it does come with a series of interchangeable hands. 8 extra hands, and then technically counting the ones that are in the forearms, you're getting a total of 10 hands. And we'll have a look at those right now. It comes with a pair of relaxed palms. Again, we've already seen these before, nicely again painted, and the fact that each one of the knuckled areas of the fingers gets its own fair share of coloring, at least black panel lining. You can see right there. It does also come included with a couple of holding hands, gripping hands for holding, say, the stun stick. It does also come with a trigger firing hand. Now the hands, the one hand that I've got currently in the socket, I'm sure I have addressed before, isn't really that much different to this one. The grip could be slightly a little bit more relaxed on the one that I have right here, but there really isn't too much different between this one and the one that's currently, like I said, in the forearm. I did swap these out, technically, to be fair. When you do get this out of the packaging, the defaulted hands are closed fists. Never the most entertaining thing to be displaying with a figure, I understand that, but it does come with a pair of closed fists, and then it does also come with another trigger firing hand. So basically a hand for both sides. Technically, you really could have the revolver and then the riot gun on both hands if you feel like that's enough firepower for you. And now let's have a closer look at least at the Ingram Unit 2. So really, a lot of what I liked before with the Ingram Unit 1 carries over now to the Ingram Unit 2. There is some difference between the two. I'll reach off camera to bring in the Ingram Unit 1 so you guys can see side to side. Shoulder pads play a big pivotal role when it comes to swapping out component pieces. Pretty much when you look at it from head to toe, most if not all the body is shared the exact same. The Ingram Unit 1 has a license of 02-21. The Unit 2 has a 0222, and then we'll change that when we switch it over to Ingram Unit 3. But again, like if you look at them side by side, there's really not a lot that gets changed. The coloring is still that vibrant white. The under-materialed body, of course, has all been done in a material fabric. This is more of a dark gray, and that carries over as well from the Ingram Unit 1 that we looked at before. I guess the biggest changes would be the shoulder pads and most definitely would be the head sculpt. The Ingram Unit 2 notably has a much wider head sculpt than the more slender design for the Ingram Unit 2 or Ingram Unit 1. Now you can swap these out. Technically, really, it's nothing to say that you have to keep the design of Ingram Unit 1 in place because you do have the components for both 2 and 3 in this set. For all intensive purposes, you could have a display of Ingram Unit 2 and 3 by simply just changing out the head, changing out the shoulder pads, and bingo bango, you've got yourself a brand new Ingram unit that you can have on your display shelf. A feature that also gets carried over from the original Ingram unit is the light up sirens. You can just pull these out, and inside is a little compartment that holds AG1 batteries. The batteries are not included when you buy these from ThreeZero, so if you are looking to pick this one up for yourself, you're going to have to stock some batteries, but I can tell you AG1 batteries are pretty cheap to come by. In fact, I did get myself a tray here of 10, and then I actually got, I bought these on Amazon, I think I got 2 trays for, I want to say, around $16. So, I mean, they're a steal and pretty much covers off a lot of the batteries that you usually require for smaller 6-scale figures like this. Needless to say, though, despite the fact that the batteries are not included, you simply just add the 2 batteries into the tray compartment underneath, and you take this little button right here and you just turn that on. And that gives you some cherries flashing away. This sits then into the place socket opening here of the shoulder pad. You can do the exact same thing on the other side. I did notice, though, on this shoulder, I guess it doesn't really matter, it could be on either one of them, but I did notice with the original Ingram Unit 1 that there's always one battery compartment, for example, that isn't tight enough to hold the battery. I don't know if it was specifically this one, it could have been this one. Either way, it doesn't really matter. One of the sections right here, I think it was this battery right here, didn't fit properly into the tray. So what I did do was I just kind of bent, just pushed it in enough for it to actually hold those batteries, at least the one that was sitting rather loose inside. But this just fits back into the open area there. Let me just show you what's going on here. On the open section of the shoulder, that just pops back into place, and you've got yourself a nice light up option. What I like about it, though, is it doesn't impede the look of the unit, for example. What I mean by that is you don't actually have to dismantle anything. You're simply just lifting up this top part here. You're just putting in the batteries and you're turning it on. I mean, there couldn't be any more easier of a job to do that. I mean, it doesn't involve you having to take the shoulder pad off. It doesn't involve you having to open up, for example, the chest piece. Unlike, say, some of the other 6-scale figures out there that generally have batteries, it usually involves you having to dismantle a lot of the figure to get to the battery compartment. I must say this is a lot easier to work around, and I'm glad that at least that ThreeZero gave you a simpler means to change out the batteries and to turn on and off the light up feature here. If your desired look, however, is to display this as Ingram Unit 3, ThreeZero gives you basically all the pieces required to do that. For starters, we'll look at the shoulder pads, and I want to show you the difference between the Mark II, or the Ingram Unit 2, and the Ingram Unit 3. The Ingram Unit 2 does have that extra flap that drops down, whereas the version 3 actually doesn't have that. It's basically the same similar design. The 3 is a little bit lower on the front, whereas the 2 has a little bit higher up. The designs are just enough different that when you are switching them out, they do look and feel very different. To go ahead and change those out, the first thing we want to do is just pop these out, because that's the last thing we want to have is damage to the batteries. Just pop those out, and then from there you're just going to remove the shoulder pads. The shoulder pads are easier to pull off than they are to put on. I thought this piece here would actually swing out, and that's not necessarily the case. Actually, in order to attach it, you're literally pushing down the shoulder pad against the ball socket right there, and that fits that into place. But we're going to go ahead and pop that off. We're going to go ahead and pop the other side off. Careful of the antennas. I almost clipped that in the process. And then you can just go ahead and repeat the steps by putting the shoulder pads for the Ingram Unit 2. Just snap that into place. If you do find it's a little bit easier, I did notice that if you swing the arms forward slightly, it's enough then you can get a clearance and get in there and connect it to the shoulder pads, because the shoulder pads are a little difficult, like I said, to snap into place. There we go. Do the exact same thing on this side. We're just going to bring the arm slightly forward, and then just from there we're going to attach this in place. I'm surprised actually that the socket is facing sideways as opposed to not being straight down. Anyways, we're going to go ahead and just attach, like I said, just fit this in place. Kind of want to bring the arm away from you. There we go, and then just plugs into place like so. We've already got a different looking design unit. Want to be careful though of the shoulders, because as I've noticed, if you do move the arms too much, the shoulders seem to then get clipped against the torso and then pop right off. They did actually give you extra shoulder pieces, or at least the Sirens. I'm just going to put the figure down here for 1 second. There we go. And just show you the difference between them. They don't seem like there's anything really different between them. If you look at them, they seem almost identical. You could technically pull the battery compartment out of this one, swap it into this one right here, but being that they are pretty much identical to one another, I simply just use the exact same Sirens and plug these then into the shoulders of the Mark III, or the Ingram Unit 3. Go ahead and find the other battery compartment. There it is right there. Plug that into place. And then all we have to really do then is change out the head. And then we've got ourselves the Ingram Unit 3. Just before we go ahead though and change out the head sculpt, the one thing I will also want to swap out to change it from the 2 to the 3 is to also change out the license plate located on the front and the back of the figure. Gone will be the 22, and its place will be 23. To change that out, you just want to grab your finger on both sides and just detach it. It seems to latch on a little tighter than the license plate located on the back. Once that's pulled off, you have 2 pegs on the back side of the plate. Line it then up to the holes located on the front, or just basically fit inside the front of the 2 front headlights there, or the equivalent of. Snap that then into place, and then the exact same thing will be repeated on the very back. Go ahead and pull this off. This will be also the section which, remembering where the neck of this stand plugged into place, and then from there you're just going to fit that then with the 23. So at least now that's changed front and back, and we've also gone ahead and changed out the shoulder pads. Let's now address the head sculpt. Personally, I'm a big fan of the Ingram Unit 2 head sculpt. It takes the same sort of elements found in the Ingram Unit 1 and just makes it a little bit wider. The visor done in emerald green is also a little bit larger than the Ingram Unit 1, but then when you start swapping things out to the Ingram Unit 3, you very much get a very drastic looking head sculpt. It still has similar elements to it, but gone then is the green visor in place of this sort of bridged covering that covers over the front of its face. It's really interesting, again, the way that they've designed this one, obviously pulling it from the original Patlabor series. To change out the head is still the same problem that you would face with the Ingram Unit 1. You want to be really careful of these back antennas. You get your finger in there and sort of just navigate around that ball joint. The ball joint does free the head rather easily, but again, you want to be very careful of these side antennas as they are very thin and brittle plastic. Then we're going to go ahead and take the ball socket and line that up to the joint. Just fit that in place and just wiggle it as you're basically applying pressure. And there you have your Ingram Unit 3. We'll just snap that everything back into place. And it's, again, a very different design from the Ingram Unit 2. Let me know down below what you prefer as your favorite head sculpt of the two. While this one is a very drastic change of pace, I still think of the two, I prefer the Ingram Unit 2 design just a little bit more. Now looking at the figure's articulation, I've just decided to keep it as the Ingram Unit 3 for the time being. I gotta admit, that head sculpt's growing on me a bit. For the articulation on the Ingram Unit 3, or 2 for that matter, you do have a ball joint that is at the top that's attached to the head itself. It does allow the head to move up and down on its own. You can also rock it back and forth, and you can rotate it all the way around. I'm sure I don't have to tell you this, but just in case again, you want to be careful again that you're not clipping against those antennas. They're so thin, and the last thing you certainly would want to do is be too quick to rotate the head. Clip this and break it off in the process. So while you are moving the head, just be mindful of where those antennas are at all times, that you don't accidentally clip them. That would just be horrible. Not only does it have full articulation via the ball joint, but it does have, right at the very base, right above the seat actually of the pilot, there is a secondary hinge joint, so you can move the head up and down. I think they do this also to sort of conceal the idea that there's a pilot sitting inside, that you can then hinge it forward and back. Bringing it also back makes things a lot easier when it comes to navigating, again, that pilot sitting inside the cockpit. So there's technically a secondary hinge joint right here, allowing the head to move forward and back. For the shoulders, you can rotate them forward, you can rotate them back. I don't feel like you can give it a full rotation, a full all the way around rotation, because it does seem when it hits a certain point, it's almost telling you that it shouldn't go any bit further. I'm thinking it is probably just the fact that the joint probably gets wrapped up here, because I mean, when I get to this section of the arm, I'm already starting to feel a little bit of resistance, and that's more than enough to tell me to stop what I'm doing. So you can get about a 3/4 rotation on the arm, rotating it all the way around. The arm does hinge in and out. As you're doing this, of course, make sure that the shoulder doesn't pop off in the process. At least it's ball jointed, but because of the way it's ball jointed in place, it's so easy for this to hit the side of the torso and just have this piece pop completely off. Before we actually look at the rest of the articulation, one thing I forgot to show, and did actually have this in the other Ingram unit as well, is that he does have the little flashers on both sides here. You just take your finger, a little harder, of course, with the shoulder pad in place, but you can actually lift these up as well. Just some extra detailing that they've incorporated. But going back to the arm, though, the arm rotates forward and back, at least from the biceps section. It does rotate forward and back. It does have a double hinge in the elbow. And whether you go with this arm that has the extension out or this hand right here, both hands do rotate all the way around with the included ball joint that's attaching, of course, the hand to the rest of the forearm. Looking at the figure's torso, it does rotate left to right, and it does also allow you to crunch it forward. I don't know if it's actually a ball joint that's working behind the scenes. Why I say that is because a ball joint technically would allow you to hinge the torso actually back, but it does seem to have a stopping point. Like, I can't get the torso to move any further backwards than this right here. So I feel like it's actually just more like a bend, just a bend spine inside there that's allowing it, yes, to move forward, but it doesn't allow it to move any bit further back than this. So while it does have, like I said, the swiveling back and forth and the crunch forward, you can't angle the torso any bit further than what's currently happening right now. Then for the legs hinge outward. You can go forward and back quite easily, actually, with a wide range of motion. And it does have a swivel, basically where it's attaching the thigh to the rest of the joint in the leg. It does swivel back and forth that way as well. It has not only just a single hinge, but it does also afford you a double hinge on the knee, so lots of posability options that you can get in place for this particular unit. And then when we address the feet do have a ankle pivot back and forth. You can move the feet forward, you can move the feet back, and there's also even toe articulation. Toe articulation, which is pretty incredible on a figure so detailed the way that this one is. There's also this section here, basically a boot cover, if you will, that does hinge up and down. Sort of does give you a little bit of freedom that when you are moving the toes forward, the foot forward, this sort of then stays out of the way. And with you being able to move this up, you can allot for a little extra clearance, especially when it comes to moving and tilting the angle, the ankle pivot back and forth. So there's the Ingram Unit 3. was formerly the Ingram Unit 2, again with a few little swap out of parts. It's a really nice designed unit. Having already picked up the Ingram Unit 1 and having already reviewed the Ingram Unit 1, it's nice the fact that both of them serve to be slightly different from one another. Even though the basics on board are basically all the same body components, there's not really much that changes from one to the other. But it's just the changing out of really the shoulder pads and the head that you really get a very different looking robot that could still make sense as being part of the same team. They're not drastically reinventing the body, they're simply just tweaking elements of it from one to the other. So when you have both figures on display, they look very different from one another. You know, spending the amount of time that I did on the Ingram Unit 3 at the end of this review, a rather funny side effect resulted in that. I find myself actually really warming up to the design of the Ingram Unit 3. Don't get me wrong, the Ingram Unit 2 has a neat design to it, but because it has a very shared emerald visor to the first one, it's a little bit wider of a head than the Ingram Unit 1, yes, but it does have a lot of very similar elements to it. Is maybe all the more reasoning why I'm digging the more stark contrast of the Ingram Unit 3. The more hidden helmets, I think, really pays off on this particular figure. So when it's all said and done, and it's time to display these spectacular pieces, I'm probably going to be keeping the Ingram Unit 1 as is, OG, the way that it should be, and I'm going to probably display the Ingram Unit 3 instead of the Ingram Unit 2, just because I like the contrast of the two different models. One of the benefits, of course, of ThreeZero packing this as a compatible set is that you can swap it out from an Ingram Unit 2 to an Ingram Unit 3. Even if you are displaying it for the longest of times on your shelf as a Unit 2, who's not to say that down the road you're not going to change your mind, and then you do have the components in place in front of you that you can just swap out the shoulders, swap out the license plates, and swap out the heads till, again, you decide to change it and have it look like the Ingram Unit 3 instead. Now, this one, again, is going to be a pre-order as it stands right now. Most online sites, I think, are sporting this guy at being a third quarter 2020 release. So if you guys are in the market of picking this one up for yourself, this one is going to be slated for, again, around that third quarter 2020 timeframe. I'd like to send out a big thank you, though, to the folks over at ThreeZero for supplying both the Ingram Unit 1 that we had looked at before and the Ingram Unit 2/3 that we had a look at in this review here. Let me know down below which design you guys like the most, whether it be the Ingram Unit 1, the Ingram Unit 2, or the Ingram Unit 3. Let me know down below in the comments section. Also, if you guys are new to this channel and digging this guy's content, want to stay on board the train and see how far it will take you, might I suggest you hit that subscribe button down below, turn the bell notification on, and stay tuned because there's going to be a lot of videos coming your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching as you always do, and I'll see you guys next time.